Long before dinosaurs became cultural icons, these mysterious fossils baffled scholars who had no framework for understanding creatures that had vanished millions of years before humans existed. William Buckland was born in 1784 in the quiet town of Axminster in Devonshire, a landscape shaped by rolling countryside and ancient geological formations. From an early age, he seemed destined to be fascinated by the hidden stories locked within the earth. His father encouraged curiosity about the natural world, and together they wandered the countryside collecting fossils. These were not yet recognized as the remains of ancient creatures in the way we understand them today. To many people at the time, fossils were mysterious shapes in stone, beautiful curiosities rather than scientific evidence. Yet young Buckland felt an instinctive fascination with them. He gathered ammonites, shells, and fragments of ancient life, building a collection that hinted at an unseen prehistoric world. This early passion carried him to the ancient halls of Oxford University. In 1801, Buckland received a scholarship to study at Corpus Christi College, an opportunity that set him on a path few could have predicted. At Oxford, he pursued classics and theology, the traditional disciplines expected of a gentleman scholar. By 1805, he had earned his Bachelor of Arts degree, and 3 years later he completed his master's degree. In 1809, he was ordained as a priest in the Church of England, apparently destined for a life within the clergy. Yet Buckland was never a conventional scholar. While studying theology, he became captivated by the emerging scientific disciplines that attempted to understand the structure of the earth itself. At Oxford, he attended lectures by the chemist and mineralogist John Kidd, whose teachings opened a new intellectual door. Geology at the time was still a developing field, filled with speculation and passionate debate about the origins of rocks, fossils, and the planet itself. Buckland found the subject irresistible. When Kidd vacated his teaching position in 1813, Buckland stepped into the role and began shaping the subject in his own energetic style. His lectures quickly became legendary within the university. While many professors delivered dry and methodical presentations, Buckland turned geology into theater. Students crowded his classes, not only for the knowledge he shared, but also for the spectacle. He gestured dramatically while explaining ancient landscapes, sometimes acting out the behavior of animals whose fossils he studied. On at least one occasion, he rode a horse into the lecture hall to illustrate geological processes. These performances made him one of the most popular lecturers at Oxford, and eventually led to him becoming the university's first official reader in geology. But Buckland's greatest discovery would not come from the lecture hall. It would come from a quarry in a small village just north of Oxford. In the early 19th century, workers at a quarry in Stonesfield were cutting stone used to make roof tiles. As they dug through the rock, they occasionally encountered strange bones embedded within the stone layers. To many laborers, these fossils were little more than curiosities, but word of unusual finds sometimes reached the attention of scholars in Oxford. Among the bones recovered were fragments of vertebrae, a massive femur, and part of a lower jaw. These remains eventually found their way into the growing collections of the Ashmolean Museum, where Buckland had taken on the unofficial role of curator. The moment Buckland examined these bones, he knew they were extraordinary. They were far too large to belong to any known animal living in Britain, yet they clearly came from a creature with a reptilian anatomy. The more he studied them, the more convinced he became that they represented something entirely new to science. Recognizing the importance of accurate documentation, Buckland turned to a talented naturalist and illustrator named Mary Morland. Morland possessed remarkable skill in capturing scientific detail through art, and Buckland commissioned her to create detailed illustrations of the fossils. Their collaboration would later become personal as well as professional. The two would eventually marry in 1825. But Buckland needed more than illustrations. He needed confirmation from one of the most respected scientists in Europe. For that, he turned to the brilliant French anatomist Georges Cuvier, whose expertise in comparative anatomy had revolutionized the study of fossils. Cuvier traveled to Oxford in 1818 to examine the mysterious bones firsthand. After careful study, Buckland and Cuvier reached a startling conclusion. The bones belonged to an enormous reptile unlike anything known in the modern world. It was not merely a large lizard. It was something far more ancient, a relic from a lost age of giant creatures that once dominated the planet. Buckland and his colleague William Conybeare gave the creature a name that reflected its immense size, Megalosaurus, meaning great lizard. The discovery electrified the scientific community. In 1824, Buckland formally presented his findings at a meeting of the Geological Society of London. His paper included Morland's meticulous illustrations and provided the first scientific description of what we now recognize as a dinosaur. When the research was later published in the Society's Transactions, Buckland secured his place in history as the first person to scientifically describe such a creature. Yet the triumph was almost overshadowed by rivalry. Another fossil hunter was making discoveries that threatened to rival Buckland's own. His name was Gideon Mantell, a doctor and geologist who had uncovered enormous fossil teeth and bones that appeared to belong to a giant herbivorous reptile. Mantell believed he had discovered an entirely different prehistoric creature that he would later call Iguanodon. At first, many scientists doubted Mantell's interpretation. Even Cuvier initially misidentified the fossils, while Buckland himself suggested alternative explanations. Whether out of skepticism or strategic caution, Buckland encouraged Mantell to delay publishing his conclusions until more evidence was available. Meanwhile, Buckland moved quickly to publish his own description of Megalosaurus. The race to document prehistoric creatures had begun. Mantell eventually published his findings in 1825, confirming the existence of another giant reptile from deep time. Together, the discoveries of Megalosaurus and Iguanodon laid the foundation for the scientific recognition of dinosaurs, although the word dinosaur itself would not be coined until later in the century. But the story of Megalosaurus has an even stranger prehistory, one that stretches back more than a century before Buckland ever examined the Stonesfield fossils. In 1677, a natural historian named Robert Plot published a book titled Natural History of Oxfordshire. Plot was a scholar deeply interested in cataloging the natural curiosities of the region. At the time, the science of paleontology did not yet exist, and many scholars believed fossils were simply mineral formations created within the earth. Plot described a remarkable fossil bone discovered in a quarry in Cornwall, Oxfordshire. The specimen had been given to him by Sir Thomas Pennystick and was clearly enormous. Plot correctly recognized it as the lower part of a femur, the thigh bone of a massive creature, but the size of the bone posed a problem. It was far too large to belong to any animal known in England. Plot initially speculated that it might belong to an elephant brought to Britain during the Roman occupation. However, after comparing the fossil with real elephant bones, he concluded they were not the same. Left without a convincing explanation, Plot made a leap that seems extraordinary today. He suggested the bone might have belonged to a giant human being. Nearly a century later, the fossil appeared again in another publication. In 1763, the naturalist Richard Brooks reproduced the illustration in his book, A New and Accurate System of Natural History. But something strange happened during the process of labeling the image. The illustration carried the caption, Scrotum Humanum. Exactly why this bizarre label appeared remains uncertain. Some historians believe the illustrator misunderstood a nearby description referring to stones resembling human anatomy. Others suspect the caption was meant humorously or ironically. Whatever the explanation, the result was one of the most awkward scientific names ever associated with a fossil. For centuries, the strange label lingered in scientific literature. Most scholars ignored it, treating it as a curiosity rather than a legitimate name. Yet in the 20th century, the eccentric geologist Beverly Halstead raised an astonishing possibility. According to the rules governing scientific naming, the earliest published name for a species can sometimes take priority. Halstead argued that because the fossil described as Scrotum Humanum might actually have belonged to Megalosaurus, the absurd label technically had precedence. The debate amused and horrified paleontologists in equal measure. Eventually, the rules of zoological nomenclature prevented the name from replacing Megalosaurus, ensuring that Buckland's dignified term would remain intact. Meanwhile, the original fossil described by Robert Plot had vanished. Over the centuries, it disappeared from museum collections, leaving behind only the illustration in Plot's book. In the 21st century, scientists began searching for the lost bone. Paleontologists, including Darren Naish and Martin Simpson, launched an effort to locate the specimen, hoping to confirm whether it truly belonged to Megalosaurus. For a moment, it seemed the mystery might finally be solved when a similar bone was discovered among museum collections. After careful study, researchers realized the bone weighed only half as much as described in Robert Plot's records. It wasn't the long-lost fossil, and the search ended in another dead end. The mystery remains unsolved, but the legacy of William Buckland endures. His description of Megalosaurus opened the door to a new era of science, revealing that Earth was once ruled by extraordinary creatures, long before humans ever walked the planet.